Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast and video clip. Today, we're going to talk about the mother of Donald Trump. Now, for those of you who don't know, it's quite common for politicians in different parts of the world to claim that their parents were British. And of course, Donald Trump is no exception. His mother came from Scotland. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky because when we say British, historically, that, as you know, meant English, drinking the tea, very nicely, having good manners, and being well spoken. But many of you might have forgotten that British actually has a much wider identity than that. It incorporates the four countries: England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. These days, the word British kind of indicates English because many people want to claim British or English identity for different reasons. And because the four countries are becoming more separated from England, it's more common for people to say, oh, my mother was Scottish, my father was Irish, my parents were Welsh. So this idea of my parents were British is kind of dying a little bit. People want to be very specific so that there's no confusion where their origins come from. Now, Donald Trump's mother came from Scotland. It's reported in the media, usually in the English media, of course. Oh, well, we shouldn't forget Donald Trump's mother was British. That's true, but it's more accurate to say Donald Trump's mother was Scottish. And we're going to read through a news report now to hear all about her and to see what she was like. So let's do that now. Right, and here we are. Donald Trump's mother from a Scottish island to New York's elite. And this is from BBC News. You can see here New York's elite. So that means the elite or the best families, And there's a picture over here. It says, by 1934, Mary Ann MacLeod had become a glamorous New Yorker. This photo was taken on the steps of a Long Island swimming pool. She's looking kind of glamorous there. And I didn't think in the 1930s women were supposed to reveal so much of themselves, but she clearly is. So let's move on. It says here, Donald Trump is a US president with a uniquely strong connection to Scotland. His mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, was born and brought up on the Hebridean island of Lewis, but immigrated to New York to live a very different life. Mary Ann was one of tens of thousands of Scots who travelled to the US and Canada in the early years of the last century, looking to escape economic hardship at home. She first left Lewis for New York in 1930 at the age of 18 to seek work as a domestic servant. Now, this was very common. Scottish people throughout history have always been traveling, trying to escape poverty. And those of you who listen to this podcast regularly will know that my parents were Scottish and they moved to England when I was a young man during the Thatcher years. My great-great-grandparents, I think, had gone to America and came back. So there's always been people moving around. And the MacLeod family in Lewis it seems they were no exception. The MacLeods, or at least that name, is very well known in Lewis, very strong tribal name. It says here, 6 years later, she was married to successful property developer Frederick Trump, the son of German migrants and one of the most eligible men in New York. So an eligible man means a man who's ready for marriage. He's one of the most sought after men because he's eligible. The fourth of their 5 children, Donald John, as he is referred to on the islands, is now US president for the second time. And yeah, it's true that Donald John is a very, very common name in the Lewis area. There's even a soap opera here, like a comedy, all about Donald John and what life would be like for him if he moved back here. So it is very much a subject of humor because the place is so impoverished, and if you went there, it's the complete opposite of American living. So yes, Donald John would be quite a common name. I saw a comedy sketch recently, which was supposedly at an airport in Lewis, and the announcer said, "Would Mr. MacLeod please report to Terminal Gate 1?" And everyone got up and left, of course, because they were all called MacLeod. So everyone, not everyone, but it's a very common name on this island, MacLeod. It says here, the fourth of their 5 children, Donald John, as he's referred to on the islands, is now US president for the second time. His mother was born in 1912 in Tong, about 3 miles from Stornoway, the main town on the Isle of Lewis. Genealogist, that's the man who traces your family history, the genealogist, the man who studies genealogy, who's traced the family tree of Mary Ann MacLeod back to the early 19th century, says her father Malcolm ran a post office and a small shop in his later years. Well, that just tells you, doesn't it, that President Trump's grandparents had a post office. And there we are, Donald Trump's mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, age 14, sitting on the windowsill. That's the bit of the window you can sit in the village of Tong. Oh, by the way, speaking of windowsills, the men have finished my bathroom, and I'm now able to use it again, thankfully. They made a real mess, but it's all done, and I'm really grateful that they were able to do it in 4 days. Right, back to the MacLeods. Economically, the family would have been slightly better off than the average in the township, he says. A township would just be like a very small town. However, life during and after World War One, in which 1,000 islanders died, was very hard, and many young people were leaving the Western Isles. Yes, my family had left the Western Isles by that point. As I mentioned, my parents were both Scottish, and my great grandparents came from the Western Islands also. And they arrived in southern Scotland, I think in the year 1840. It says here the Isle of Lewis had also suffered the Lolaire disaster in 1919, when 200 servicemen from the island had drowned. I don't know what the Lolaire disaster was, but clearly it was a boating disaster if it's talking about people drowning. And they were coming home for the first New Year of peace. Oh, what a pity. It says here, Mr. Lawson says, Mary Ann MacLeod was from a very large family, 9 siblings, that's your brothers and sisters, and the move at that time was away from the island. It says here, the move by Viscount Leverhulme to revive the island, clearly an Englishman, I think, with a name like that, had gone bust, and there was not much prospect for young people. Yeah, in the island at that time, there were loads of aristocrats from England who were trying to make the best of living there. And it says here, what else could she do? And there she is again, Marianne McLeod. Yeah, on a boat on her way to America in the 1930s. It says here, Mr. Lawson adds, nowadays you might think of going to the mainland Scotland, that is, but in those days, most people went to Canada. It was far easier to make a life in America, and many people had relatives there. And that's true. Even for my family, they all headed for Canada. The genealogist said Mr. Trump's mother was slightly different in that her sister Catherine, one of 8 members of the McLeod family to have immigrated to America, had moved from Canada to New York. When Catherine returned to Lewis for a visit in 1930, her 18-year-old sister Marianne went with her to look for work. It appears that she found work as a nanny, that's basically a babysitter, with a wealthy family in a big house in the suburbs of New York, but lost the job as the US sank into depression after the Wall Street crash. Marianne returned briefly to Scotland in 1934, but by then she had met Fred Trump and soon returned to New York for good. The couple lived in a wealthy area of Queens, and Marianne was active with charity work. And there we are. There she is again. And this is with baby Marianne. I guess that must be Donald Trump's sister then. There we are. Donald Trump still has 3 cousins who live on the island of Lewis, including 2 who live in the ancestral home, which has been rebuilt since Marianne McLeod's time. All 3 cousins have consistently refused to speak to the media. Speaking to the BBC in 2017 after Donald Trump's first presidential victory, John A. McIver, a local councillor and friend of the cousins, said, I know the family very well. They're very nice, gentle people, and I'm sure they don't want all the publicity that's around. I quite understand that they don't want to talk about it. Mr. McIver said Marianne McLeod was well known and much respected in the community and used to attend the church on her visits home. And there she is again, this time in Glasgow in 1934. Clydebank is a place in Glasgow. Mr. Trump's mother, I guess it's President Trump, isn't it, became a US citizen in 1942 and died in 2000, aged 88. But she returned to Lewis throughout her life and always spoke Gaelic, Mr. McIver said. For those of you who don't know, Gaelic is an indigenous language in the northern part of the UK. It is still spoken by quite a few people, and they're trying to revive it. It's a very interesting language, and I would encourage you to have a look at that if you don't know what it is. According to genealogist Bill Lawson, surnames are a relatively recent phenomenon on the islands, and official records only go back to the early decades of the 19th century. I'm not sure I agree with that, because the church kept very, very poignant records, very accurate records, but probably in Gaelic, I think. His research took him back as far as John Roy McLeod, which in Gaelic is Ian Rua, named for a tendency to red hair, because Ruach, or Rua, as it's said sometimes, means red. Mary Ann Trump's paternal McLeod came from Vatishkar, a few miles north of Tong. Here's a little map here. You can see where Lewis is. Very hard to get to up there, really. Oh, and the broadband is terrible. Do you know, if you want the internet there, you have to ask for it. It's not an automatic right. Yeah. I love the way they've just called Scotland. One word. Nothing else shown on the map except this one little place. Edinburgh is there at the bottom, but this is all of Scotland. Not quite true, actually. There's more there. I mean, Glasgow would be here. Right. It says here, her great-grandfather, Alexander Roy McLeod, and his son Malcolm were thought to have drowned together while fishing in the 1850s. Oh, how interesting. Yeah, my family all came from a little island called Isla, which, as far as I know, I think it's this one. I think. I could be wrong. It might be this one, but I think it's this one. Isla. Yeah. Uh, way back. Anyway, let's continue. On Mary Ann's mother's side, the Smiths were among the families cleared from South Lochs area of Lewis in 1826. The period of the Highland clearances on the mainland has largely missed Lewis. Yeah, the Highland clearances was when basically the whole country was emptied. Many people forced islanders off the islands, and they made some mass exit for other countries. It was really sad. Basically, this whole chunk here, everyone was kicked out, and they all had to leave, and including my family. Right, let's see. Yeah, that was called the Highland Clearances, and if you have some time, it's worth looking at that as well. In most cases, the displaced tenants were relocated to elsewhere on Lewis rather than sent to overseas. And it's saying that Mary Ann MacLeod's family, her ancestry, had been moved to Stornoway from elsewhere on the island because of the clearances. Another fishing tragedy, Donald Smith was drowned in 1868. I don't know what relative he was to them, but anyway, his widow was left with 3 children, one of whom, the youngest, Mary, Donald Trump's grandmother, was less than a year old. Okay, and here we can see Mary Trump in 1999, shortly before she died, with daughter Elizabeth, son Donald, and then Melania before he married her. So that's the mother there. Oh, she looks very Scottish. Gee, she looks like my grandmother. We easily could be related. So that's the daughter, that's Melania, and that's Mr. Trump. Mary succeeded her mother at 13. The smallest of the Crofts in Tong. Mary succeeded her mother at 13. 13 Tong. Succeeded her mother at 13. I don't know what 13 Tong is. It sounds like a street address, but Tong is in the area of Lewis. And it was the smallest of the Crofts, that means the farms, in Tong. After her marriage to Malcolm MacLeod, they were able to acquire the Smiths' original croft of 5 Tong and move there. I think maybe I'm getting confused here. Let me read that again. So this is a picture of the Trumps. Yeah, Mary succeeded her mother. Who is Mary? Okay, so we're now saying that Trump's mother succeeded her mother, Trump's grandmother. After her marriage to Malcolm MacLeod, they were able to acquire another croft. Okay, I'm lost completely with the genealogy there, but never mind. Donald Trump's mother, Mary Ann, was the youngest of their 10 children. Her businessman son, Donald, visited the house in which his mother grew up in 2008. On that trip, he said he'd been to Lewis once before, but could remember little about it, and there he is. And that's the house. My goodness me. It's cousins hovering in the background, I think. It's estimated he spent 97 seconds in the home during the Whistle Stop Tour. Whistle Stop Tour just means a quick stop. At that time, he said, I've been very busy. I'm building jobs all over the world. It's very tough to find the time to come back. And then he goes on to say he has a plane. He's glad he did it. And just other things as well. Mr. Lawson says, if you want to celebrate anyone, you should perhaps celebrate Mary Ann, his mother, who's done a lot of work for the islands. Donald arrived off a plane and then disappeared. One photo shoot, that was it. I can't say he left much of an impression behind him. Yeah, he comes to Scotland a lot actually because he has a golf course here, but I'm not aware that he spends any time on the islands. So yeah, it's very interesting indeed. There we are. That was just a very quick whistle stop tour, whistle stop tour through the life of Donald Trump's mother. But she has her own Wikipedia site, so she must be very famous. And we're just going to dip in there for a moment just to see if it reveals anything further about her and the family. Right, so here we are again. And this time we're looking at Marianne McLeod Trump. Okay, so you can see here it says Marianne Trump redirects here for her daughter and former U.S. federal judge. See Marianne Trump. Barry. Oh, very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. So let's continue reading. Born a native Scottish Gaelic speaker in the Outer Hebrides, MacLeod immigrated. So this is when you go into the country. Emigrate is when you leave with an E. She raised 5 children and lived in New York. And there we are. She was born in the village of Tong. There's a picture of her. Look at the touche on her. Jeez. In British English, the touche is the mouth. In American English, the touche is, well, let's just say another part of the anatomy. So raised in a Gaelic-speaking household, she was the youngest of 10 children born to Marianne MacLeod and Malcolm MacLeod. Let's see what else we can see. She died 88, New Hyde Park in New York. And she was British. Her husband was Fred. He has his own site as well. Isn't that nice? They've all got Wikipedia sites. They must indeed have been famous. More about the deaths by fishing. And there's the grandparents there. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It says here MacLeod's paternal grandparents, Alexander and Anne, with their son Donald. So that'll be Marianne's brother, I think, yes. With several siblings having already established themselves there, MacLeod may have first visited the US for a short stay in 1929. And it tells us the boat she went in. She was one of tens of thousands of young Scots who left for the US or Canada. There we are. Arriving in the US with $50, MacLeod lived with her older sister, Christina Matheson, in Queens and worked as a domestic servant for 4 years, as well as a nanny. The position was eliminated by the Great Depression. That's when the stock market crashed in America. And in 2016, the Scottish newspaper The National put it, she started life in America as a dirt poor servant, escaping the even worse poverty of her native land. That's a bit harsh, I think, to be honest. At least she was trying to get away from here. I can't blame her for that. There's Donald Trump's father there. Though the 1940 census form filed by Marianne and her husband stated that she was a naturalized citizen, she actually wasn't. Yeah, so the census form is a form we have to complete here in the UK every 10 years, and we have to give certain information on that form, which is how the government gather not personal information, but just trends about society. They do it in America as well. What else? Yeah, it just goes on to talk about her marriage. Oh, look, they honeymooned in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Honeymoon is that holiday you take after you get married. Oh, look, she was Presbyterian. They married at the Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. There's Donald in 1964. Yeah, they were living in Queens, apparently. MacLeod spent time collecting coins from laundry machines. Oh, wow. It's very sad, isn't it? They must have been very poor. MacLeod drove a Rolls Royce. It bore the vanity plates MMT. Well, she wasn't poor by that time, was she? That was in 1955. And that's Donald Trump's sister, Mary Ann, in 2006. She was also a volunteer in the hospitals and in different. They were active in the Salvation Army. Oh, interesting. The Lighthouse for the Blind and other places as well. As a parent, MacLeod was more reserved than her husband. Friends of the children observed fewer interactions with her than with him. She was known for a dynamic orange swow. That's like a big hairstyle, similar to the hairstyle that Donald's known for. 1981, Mary Ann MacLeod's oldest son, Fred C. Trump Jr., died from complications due to alcoholism. Oh, well. She obviously hadn't forgotten her Scottishness then if she had alcoholism in the family. It's absolutely rife around here. Very sad, very sad. I went to a cafe today. This is just off the cuff, okay? I went to a cafe today. While I was in that cafe, I had a delicious sandwich, really delicious. And when I had finished, the man said, "I'd like you to try my new alcoholic drink." And I said, "But this is a coffee shop." And he said, yeah, it's not something I'm selling. I just want you to try it. It's something that I brought back from my holidays. And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't drink alcohol." And he looked really shocked and he was really like taken aback. What? You mean that you only drink whiskey? I said, "No, I don't drink alcohol." And he didn't know how to deal with that at all. Very interesting. It shows just how deep drinking is here. People drink here like it's lemonade. Anyway, oh look, she had osteoporosis. Oh, that's sad, isn't it? Oh, she was mugged while shopping in Long Island. Oh, what a pity. And she resisted the mugger's attempt to steal her pass. And so they knocked her to the ground and beat her. Oh, that's sad, isn't it? Donald Trump rewarded the man who helped her at that time with a check and kept him from losing his home. Oh, that's sweet, I suppose. Fred died in 1999 after he caught pneumonia. And they're buried in Queens. The death notice in her Scottish hometown newspaper, the Stornoway Gazette. Oh, I know, it was brutal. That's one of the worst newspapers. Oh dear. Yeah, a sheep has died. It reads, "Peacefully in New York on the 7th of August, Mary Ann Trump, aged 88, daughter of the late Malcolm and Mary MacLeod, much missed." And there we are. Yeah, so that is the story of the Trumps. So I'll tell you what we're going to do now, since we have some time left. The first thing we're going to do is let's just come back to our main screen. Right, let's just have a look at some terms related to immigration. Okay, so we've got immigration. It's when you arrive somewhere, you immigrate into a country, you emigrate out of your own country. Migration is a general term about movement. Birds migrate in the winter. Relocation, of course, is when you up sticks, as we say in the UK, or uproot and go somewhere else. And citizenship is when you try to get into another country to get legal residency and to be recognized as a person from that country. Residency, of course, is your permission to stay. Asylum is when you're running away from a bad country and you're claiming asylum in the next. It's also the name of an excellent music group, Soul Asylum. Do you remember their big hit, Runaway Train? Exile, of course, is when you've left your land. Some people say you've been exiled. It means you've not had much of a choice in leaving. Border, we all know what they are. Passport, the document you need to leave and to arrive. And the visa, permission to go in to the country. It's also the name of a credit card, which, yes, well, you all know what a Visa card is, I'm sure. Types of immigration: refugee, asylum seeker, undocumented immigrants, permanent resident, naturalized citizen, economic migrant, skilled worker, seasonal worker, and deportee. All of those should be quite straightforward for you, I think, except maybe deportee. That's someone who's been kicked out. Legal and bureaucratic terms. The green card, that's permission to stay in the US. They have a lottery, don't they, about getting to the US? I know that if you're in the UK, you can't apply for that, or at least if you're a UK citizen, you can't. A work permit, permission to work somewhere else. Visa application, your application to have a visa. Immigration policy, citizenship test, we all hate those. Immigration law, border control, and deportation. Detention center and immigration officer, all words that Mrs. Trump, I'm sure, had encountered in her lifetime. Well, that's it from me right now. I really hope you've enjoyed this, a little walk through Donald Trump's mother's life, and I hope you've picked up a few new words along the way. I'll be back in a few days with more podcasts and exciting information from the UK. And until then, have a lovely, lovely evening, day, or night. See you. Bye.